A homeless man finds a wallet full of money and documents. He decides to return it to its owner, who is impressed by his honesty and then does this. Dennis had always been a man of solid principles and family values, raised in a humble home. He was the youngest of 3 brothers, but the family ties had weakened over time. His parents, Patrick and Rebecca, were simple, generous-hearted people who worked hard to ensure that their children wanted for nothing. Dennis admired his father's work ethic, as he faced the scorching sun and harsh weather as a bricklayer to put food on the table. His mother, a dedicated housekeeper, spent long hours cleaning. From an early age, Dennis learned the value of hard work and honesty. As a teenager, he began helping his father on job sites and quickly stood out as a dedicated and responsible young man. "You have a bright future ahead, Dennis," his father would say while wiping the sweat from his brow, proud of his son. However, the relationship with his brothers was never easy. With different personalities, each followed his own path. His older brothers, Mark and Brian, left home early, each in pursuit of their own dreams, and contact became increasingly rare. When he turned 25, Dennis decided to start his own business, a small hardware store that, despite initial difficulties, began to thrive over time. He was a hard-working and determined man, willing to face any challenge to see his venture grow. During this time, he met Barbara, a young teacher who quickly became the love of his life. They married soon after, in a simple but joyful ceremony. Barbara was the support Dennis needed on his journey. She encouraged him in moments of doubt and celebrated every small victory by his side. As the years went by, the couple dedicated themselves to building a life together. Dennis invested in expanding the store while Barbara continued teaching at the local school. Their plans to have children were postponed due to their intense work schedule, but they dreamed of the day they would become parents. "One day, our home will be filled with the laughter of children," Barbara would say with a smile as she embraced Dennis on their porch. Despite the ups and downs, life seemed to be on track for the couple until a series of misfortunes began to unravel everything they had built. The first blow came with the economic crisis that hit the country. Dennis's store, which had once thrived, began to face serious financial difficulties. Sales plummeted, bills piled up, and Dennis found himself forced to take out loans to keep the business afloat. He spent sleepless nights worrying about the possibility of bankruptcy. Barbara, always by his side, tried to comfort him. "We'll get through this together, Dennis," she said, holding his hands. However, the weight of responsibility began to take its toll, and for the first time, Dennis felt the real fear of losing everything he had. Amid the financial turmoil, Dennis's parents' health began to decline as well. His father, Patrick, suffered a massive heart attack, and Dennis felt the loss like a knife to his chest. The pain of losing the man who had always been his inspiration was overwhelming. Shortly afterward, his mother fell gravely ill, and after months of battling an incurable disease, she too passed away. Dennis felt as if the world was collapsing around him. With no brothers nearby, Mark was overseas and Brian lost in his own troubles. Dennis found himself alone to deal with his grief. With the store's bankruptcy, the loss of his parents, and debts piling up, Dennis and Barbara had to sell their house to settle some of their obligations. They moved into a small apartment, trying to start over, but the emotional strain was evident. Barbara began showing signs of depression, and the relationship, which had once been a refuge, became a daily challenge. "I don't know how we got to this point," Dennis said, feeling helpless in the face of the situation. Barbara, who had always been strong, now seemed a shadow of her former self. The breaking point came when Barbara, unable to cope with the pressures and constant losses, decided to leave. They separated amicably, but for Dennis, it felt like losing the last anchor that kept him steady. Alone, without family or a job, he ended up being evicted from the small apartment he was renting. Doors closed on him, and Dennis found himself on the streets, a place he had never imagined he would one day call home. His days turned into a sequence of uncertainties, living off small gigs, aimlessly, with hope fading with each new dawn. Now, Dennis was just another among many invisibles, walking the city sidewalks, struggling to survive. He wandered with an old backpack on his back, holding the few belongings he had left. His face, once marked by smiles and dreams, now bore the scars of time and disappointments. He still maintained his dignity, refusing to give in to despair, but each day was a silent battle against sadness and loneliness. It was a cold morning, and the streets were beginning to bustle with the usual rush of the city center. Dennis, as he did every day, wandered aimlessly, searching for a place where he could find some temporary work or a piece of bread to stave off hunger. The biting wind signaled another tough day ahead. Dressed in his tattered coat and with his hands shoved in his pockets, he walked with his head down along the sidewalks, avoiding hurried people who seemed not to notice his presence. Dennis was used to the indifference, but still, he felt a pang of pain every time someone looked away as they passed by him. As he walked, Dennis noticed something on the ground that seemed out of place, a glint that contrasted with the dirty asphalt. He bent down, curious, and found a well-cared-for brown leather wallet, something that clearly didn't belong there. Hesitant, he picked up the wallet, looked around, and not seeing anyone nearby who seemed to have lost something, he decided to open it. His eyes widened as he saw the contents, a considerable amount of money, neatly organized bills, and several cards, including identification documents belonging to a man named Andrew Estrada, a well-dressed businessman in the photo. Dennis's heart raced. He couldn't remember the last time he had held so much money in his hands. The amount was more than he could earn in weeks of small jobs, and his first thought was what anyone in his situation might think: this money could mean days with less hunger, less cold, maybe even a chance to start over. Dennis closed the wallet for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision before him. No one will know, he thought, battling with his own conscience. The temptation to keep the money was strong, a quick solution to a problem that seemed never-ending. As Dennis walked back, he felt the weight of the wallet in his hand like a burden of morality. He sat down on a bench in the square, away from the hustle and bustle, trying to organize his thoughts. He looked up at the sky, searching for answers that wouldn't come. "What do I do?" he murmured to himself. The memory of his father Patrick's teachings echoed in his mind: "Dennis, always be honest, no matter what happens." The words seemed to resurface from a distant past, but never had they been more relevant than at that moment. Dennis knew what he needed to do, even if it was difficult. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and decided he would find the owner of the wallet. The search began in the surrounding area, timidly asking merchants and pedestrians if they knew Andrew Estrada. Some ignored him, others shook their heads, and still others looked at him with suspicion. "Who would lose that much money?" a newspaper vendor asked, as Dennis showed him the businessman's identification. Nobody seemed to know anything, but Dennis persisted. Each "no" he heard reinforced how challenging this mission would be, but he didn't give up. He knew his integrity was at stake, and he didn't want to lose what little was left of it. After hours of fruitless searching, Dennis finally found a lead at a cafe where he stopped for a glass of water. The server, a young man named Timothy, recognized the name. "Andrew Estrada? I think he has an office on Central Avenue. He comes by here often for coffee," the young man said, pointing toward the busy avenue. Dennis thanked him with a nod and left, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. It was as if a light had appeared at the end of the tunnel, but there was still a long way to go. Dennis walked to Central Avenue, his step steady but his heart heavy with the responsibility of the task. Upon arriving at the indicated address, he found himself in front of an imposing building with mirrored glass and a sign that read, "Estrada and Associates." Dennis stopped before the building, feeling small in the presence of its grandeur. He looked at the wallet once more, realizing how far removed he was from that world of success and wealth. The entrance was busy, with well-dressed people coming and going, cell phones in hand and serious expressions on their faces. Dennis hesitated before entering. He had never felt so out of place, but he knew he had to finish what he started. With slow steps, he approached the reception desk. The receptionist, an elegant and busy woman, cast him a curious glance as he neared. Dennis swallowed hard, nervous. "Excuse me, I found this wallet on the street. It belongs to Andrew Estrada," he said, extending the wallet, which now felt like it weighed tons. The receptionist frowned and looked Dennis up and down, as if trying to understand how a man in his condition could be there. "Andrew is in a meeting right now. Can you wait a moment?" the receptionist said, still skeptical. Dennis nodded, sitting down in one of the reception chairs. He took a deep breath, feeling a mix of nerves and relief. He didn't know what to expect from this meeting, but something deep within him told him he was on the right path. Dennis looked around, observing the details of the place: urban landscape paintings on the walls, business magazines on the coffee table, and a digital board showcasing the company's achievements. While he waited, Dennis reflected on what had brought him there. His life had been full of twists and turns, but for the first time in a long while, he felt he was doing something that mattered. He didn't know if Andrew would thank him or simply accept the wallet back and carry on with his life, but for Dennis, the mere act of being there was already a moral victory. He gripped the arm of the chair tightly, trying to contain his anxiety as he awaited the moment to return the wallet to its rightful owner. Andrew's meeting finally came to an end, and he stood up from the conference table, still conversing with some of his colleagues. He was a successful businessman, used to solving problems quickly and running his company with a firm hand. As he made his way to his office, the receptionist, Ava, an efficient and attentive woman, approached him with a look of mild concern. "Mr. Estrada, sorry to interrupt, but there's a man in reception. He says he found your wallet on the street. To be honest, he looks a bit suspicious," she said, trying to choose her words carefully. Andrew frowned, surprised. He hadn't even noticed his wallet was missing, too busy with the day's responsibilities. "Suspicious, how?" he asked, intrigued, as he picked up some documents from his desk. Ava hesitated before answering. "Well, he looks like a homeless man. I don't know how he found your wallet, but I thought it would be best to warn you before letting him in," Ava said, still cautious. Andrew thought for a moment and, seeing the urgency of the situation, replied quickly. "Let him in, please. I want to speak with him now." Ava nodded and went to the reception desk, calling Dennis, who was anxiously waiting in the chair. "Mr. Estrada will see you now," she said, still a bit skeptical but indicating the direction of Andrew's office. Dennis stood up, adjusting his old jacket and walking timidly toward the luxurious office. When he entered, Andrew was standing there, waiting with a serious but curious expression. "You found my wallet?" Andrew asked directly, looking at Dennis with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Yes, sir. I was walking down the street when I saw it lying on the ground. I know I could have kept the money, but I thought it was right to return it," Dennis said hesitantly, extending the wallet to Andrew. Andrew took it, quickly opening it and confirming that everything was there: the money, the cards, and, most importantly, the documents he desperately needed. Andrew let out a sigh of relief and looked at Dennis with a new gaze, now mixed with gratitude and surprise. "You have no idea how important this is to me. I have an urgent trip tomorrow, and without these documents, I wouldn't be able to board." "I don't even know how to thank you," Andrew said, his voice heavy with sincerity. Dennis gave a shy smile but couldn't help making an honest comment about his own situation. "Sir, I only did what I thought was right. No matter my circumstances, honesty is all I have left," Dennis said, looking away, not wanting to draw too much attention to himself. Andrew observed Dennis closely. He saw a weary-looking man, wearing worn clothes, with a face that bore stories of suffering but also of dignity. It was hard to believe that someone in such conditions would have refused the chance to take the money and move on. "Are you homeless?" Andrew asked, trying to understand more about the man who had unwittingly returned not just a wallet to him, but also a sense of faith in humanity. "Yes, sir. It's been a while. I lost my business, my home, my family. Now I try to survive one day at a time. When I found your wallet, I thought for a moment about keeping the money, but I couldn't live with that, Dennis explained, his voice firm yet marked by the weight of his experiences. Andrew fell silent for a moment, feeling that this conversation was beyond a simple return of a lost item. It was a meeting of values that many around him, with everything they owned, failed to demonstrate. I didn't expect this, Dennis. Truly, you've done more than many would, Andrew said, stepping closer and taking all the bills out of the wallet. He counted them quickly and, without hesitation, handed all the money to Dennis. Please, accept this. I know it's not much given what you're facing, but it's a way to show my gratitude, Andrew said, looking Dennis in the eyes. Dennis hesitated, not because he didn't need the money, but because he felt he didn't deserve such recognition for simply doing what he thought was right. Thank you, sir. This will help me a lot. But know that I would have returned your wallet even without anything in return, Dennis said, accepting the money with a humble expression. He said goodbye with a slight nod, feeling a mix of gratitude and relief. Andrew watched him until he reached the door, where Dennis turned around and thanked him once again before leaving the office. The door slowly closed, leaving Andrew alone but with his mind full of thoughts. Andrew sat back in his chair, looking at the empty wallet in his hand. He thought about the man he had just met and what it meant. For Andrew, Dennis was a reminder that values like honesty and character weren't necessarily tied to wealth or social standing. He wondered how someone with nothing to lose chose to do the right thing while so many around him, with everything to lose, made wrong choices daily. As Andrew returned to work, one thought wouldn't leave his mind: Dennis's integrity was a rare treasure, more valuable than any wallet stuffed with money. The story of that homeless man, who for a moment crossed paths with his own, left a mark on Andrew, and he knew that somehow, it couldn't end there. Andrew embarked on his trip the day after meeting Dennis, but even amid the rush of work commitments, he couldn't stop thinking about the man who had found his wallet. During the long hours spent in airports and meetings, Dennis's face and story echoed in his mind. Andrew wondered how someone who had lost everything could maintain such dignity and honesty, a striking contrast to the business world he was used to, where loyalties were often bought and sold. Days later, when Andrew returned to the city, he decided to stop by the cafe he always went to when he needed a moment to reflect. He sat near the window, and while he absent-mindedly watched the hustle and bustle of the street, he spotted a familiar figure from a distance: Dennis, sitting on a bench in the square, lost in his own thoughts. The sight of Dennis, with his worn clothes and distant gaze, prompted Andrew to make a decision right then and there. He knew that a person like Dennis deserved more than life had given him. Andrew got up and walked over to Dennis, who recognized him immediately. "Mr. Estrada?" Dennis said, surprised to see the businessman approaching. "What brings you here?" Andrew smiled and extended his hand. "I came for a coffee, but it seems fate has put us face to face again," he said in a friendly tone. "I'd like to talk to you, Dennis. Let's go to the cafe, my treat." Dennis hesitated for a second but accepted the invitation, feeling honored by Andrew's attention. Sitting at the cafe, Andrew began to ask more about Dennis, wanting to better understand the story of the man who had left such a deep mark on his mind. "Tell me more about yourself, Dennis. I want to understand how you ended up in this situation," Andrew said, looking directly into Dennis's eyes. With a deep sigh, Dennis started to recount his story, from the happy days alongside Barbara and the dreams they had for the future to the bankruptcy of his small hardware business, the loss of his home, and the estrangement from his family. He spoke about the death of his parents, the separation from Barbara, and finally, the harsh life on the streets. Andrew listened intently to every word, not interrupting, absorbing the depth of Dennis's journey. "You had your own business, then?" Andrew asked, intrigued. Dennis nodded, passionately explaining about the store he had built from scratch, which for a time had been his pride. "I did everything, you know. I worked from Sunday to Sunday. But things got out of my control, and before long, I lost everything I had fought to build," Dennis said, his voice heavy with a mix of sadness and nostalgia. Andrew remained silent for a moment, reflecting on what he had just heard. Then, with a spark of determination in his eyes, he said, "Dennis, I believe that good people deserve good things. You've shown a character that is rare, and I want to help you get back on your feet. I have the resources, and you have the experience and the will. Let's do this together. I want to invest in your business, but this time, we'll do it the right way." Dennis was stunned, unsure if he was dreaming or if those words were real. "Sir, I don't even know what to say. I never imagined someone could believe in me like this," Dennis said, his eyes welling with emotion. "You don't need to say anything right now," Andrew said, smiling. "Just know that you deserve this opportunity, and I'm here to ensure you have it. I want to see you back in the place you deserve." And so, the plan was set in motion. Andrew invested a significant amount of money for Dennis to reopen his business, now with all the necessary support to avoid the mistakes of the past. Dennis dove headfirst into the project, working day and night with the same fervor he had years ago, but this time with Andrew's guidance and support. In just a few months, Dennis's new business began to thrive. He dedicated himself wholeheartedly, and his store became known in the area, winning customers over with the quality of service and the character of its owner. Dennis's transformation was remarkable, with his hair and beard trimmed, clean clothes, and a renewed expression. He looked like a completely different man. It wasn't just his appearance that had changed, it was the confidence, the sparkle in the eyes of someone who had been given a new chance. Andrew and Dennis continued to meet regularly, no longer as benefactor and beneficiary, but as great friends. In one of these meetings, Dennis tried to return the money that Andrew had invested, insisting that he didn't feel comfortable keeping something that wasn't his. "Andrew, I'm eternally grateful to you. Please, take this money back," Dennis said, extending the envelope to Andrew. But Andrew refused, smiling and shaking his head. "This investment wasn't about money, Dennis. It was about believing in you because you showed me what true character is. What you did for me that day is worth more than any amount. Keep this and move forward. The world needs more people like you," Andrew said, a glint of pride in his eyes. Dennis smiled, understanding that what he had received was not just financial help but a new life, a fresh start grounded in trust and friendship. The story of Dennis, the man who returned a lost wallet without expecting anything in return, spread as an example of honesty and resilience. He never forgot where he came from, and whenever he could, he helped others who, like him, had lost everything. And so, his journey, marked by losses and triumphs, transformed into an inspiring lesson about the power of kindness, honesty, and the second chances that everyone deserves. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.